Well, hello YouTube, it's me, Fortmaster, and welcome to a new reaction. This is, does the railroad in Choo Choo Charles actually make sense, and the game scary? This is by Cheeseyeen, and I've said it before, I'm a huge foamer, I love trains, and I also just love, videos like this, where they kind of they look into they look into game worlds, and they see what's actually given to the player and see oh, does this actually make sense to, real world examples? Oh god, I'm forgetting the name of the YouTuber now, but I know he has an entire series going over oh, do rivers in this world make sense? Did this make sense? I think the last one I saw of him was he was trying to make sense of where water and dams and stuff like that were, and if they made sense in Cyberpunk 2077. And I saw the thumbnail for one where he was going through Red Dead Redemption 2 and seeing if the power lines made any sense. And I generally just love sort of content like that, seeing because obviously in a video game world, it doesn't have to be, 100%. But at the same time, it is kind of fascinating to see either how close or how far they actually did get to real world practices. And Choo Choo Charles, I think, is a pretty good example, because, I never played the game myself, though I did see, a couple of playthroughs about it when it first came out. And, from what I remember, the railroad that's on the island, it just services mines, mostly. And, the less you say about the actual engines, the better. Those, I generally just want to see, because, I've never sat down and actually wondered, how accurate were the railways in, Choo Choo Charles? Just a quick and easy sort of silly little, mascot horror game. And, I've been surprised before, so I want to see, how close they actually are. So yeah, we should probably get this thing started. So yeah, of course, as always, the original video is linked in the description if you haven't seen it yet for some reason. Corner video will lead to my Let's Play of the day. And if you like this video or any other video that I make, I'd very much appreciate it if you gave the video a like and subscribe to my channel, because almost 3/4 of the people that watch my channel aren't subscribed, and I'd very much like that to change, because my next big goal is hopefully at 6,000 subscribers by the end of the year. But yeah, with all that out of the way, let's get this thing started then, shall we?
I honestly can't believe it, but this video is sponsored by Manta Sleep.
Why is it partially blurred? What's going on there?
Choo Choo Charles is a horror game that brings to life all those edgy memes about Thomas the Tank Engine. But if you look closer, the game is actually a cleverly constructed metaphor for the stranglehold Class 1 rail companies hold over America's rail network. What? For a massive spoiler, my opinion of the game is just fine. Not really all that scary, but I at least had fun playing it, which is more than I can say for several other games I've reviewed on this channel. I'll of course go over the reasons why this game is just a 6 out of 10, it's closer to a 7 than a 5, but talking about how the game is just okay isn't really all that exciting for you, me, or the YouTube algorithm. So instead, I'm going to pivot this video in an entirely different direction and try to answer the question, does the rail system in Choo Choo Charles make sense? It was a question that came to mind when I realized I was paying more attention to the, let's just say, extremely odd design of the railroad than I was the giant spider demon that was actively trying to kill me. But what exactly do I mean by make sense? Well, to pander to nostalgia, let's bring up the Calamari Desert train from Mario 64. While visually pleasing, it doesn't serve any apparent purpose. It's a passenger train that just goes in a small circle and then through a random rock formation without any apparent stops or stations. So in short, no, this train does not make sense. So with that in mind, what I'm asking is, does the train we drive in Choo Choo Charles belong to a rail network that would make some kind of sense in the real world? But that's a bit too long for a YouTube title, so does it make sense is what we're going with. It's actually a pretty fun problem, because while the train itself is an abomination, and by
God, yeah, though, if it wasn't obvious, I don't even think you even need to really know that much about trains to know that, something like that is just not accurate. One, it's not an actual steam engine, because, come on. And then on top of that, why, because there are such things as steam outline diesels, but they're diesel locomotives that are designed to look like a steam locomotive. But, those are mostly for theme parks and the like. why would a mining company have something like that?
By that I mean the train we conduct, not the living metaphor for Warren Buffett. The actual rail system on the island of Aranirum is fairly complex and includes some neat details to clue us in on the inner workings of this island, which makes me wonder if this is now technically a lore video. Ugh, my voice isn't near smug enough for that. Of course, I'll still be talking about the horror in gameplay. This is a horror-focused channel after all, and yes, I do realize that this might turn out to be a bad idea because I can't imagine there's all that much overlap between horror enthusiasts and train spotters.
Finally, a
Video essay.
for me!
Now, while I consider myself versed enough in horror to properly talk about Choo Choo Charles as a game, I don't think I'm similarly qualified to talk about its rail system. For that, I want to start off by thanking the Nickel Plate Railroad Museum. This video isn't sponsored by them, and in fact, I don't think they even know who I am.
No.
But a lot of the various maps, exhibits, and even a few of the engines on display really gave me a lot of ideas for how the Arania Secret rail system might translate to the real world. If you're ever in Bellevue, Ohio for some reason that isn't the giant roller coaster park, seriously take an afternoon to walk through it. The museum is packed with really cool stuff, and for some reason only costs $10 to enter. I would have paid 20 easy. I also
God, I haven't gone to a museum in a long time. One of these days, I need to go downtown and just go to the Toronto Railway Museum. I know it's not the biggest one, but I've honestly, like, it's a bit of a stain on my pride as a foamer. But, I've never actually been there before. I guess it's just one of those things like, oh, you live in the place all along, so you never actually go to any of the places there.
also want to thank Name Withheld, who lives in Location Withheld, and greatly values his privacy. A lot of this video is going to be directly thanks to his own help and expertise, so if I get anything wrong, you can blame him. Both him and the Nickel Plate Railroad were invaluable to the making of this video, because do you have any idea how hard it is to look up facts about mine trains on the modern internet? I try to research something like the average weight of a minecart, and the first 3 results will be for Minecraft, Factorio, and Dwarf Fortress. Very helpful, Google, thank you. I can now sleep at night. Not because of you, but because of Manta Sleep. I used to struggle with all those doom-scrolling, imaginary, angry rants I'm totally winning in my head, but not anymore. Manta Sleep. Now those thoughts of existential dread are drowned out by my Manta Sound Sleep Mask. Yes, I can sleep anywhere I am legally allowed to due to these ridiculously comfortable masks. Getting tossed into a trunk. Yes. Thrown into a ditch. Yes. I can even sleep while making fun of Xenoblade Chronicles 2. Yes! According to the National Library of Medicine, yes, I looked this up, you should know that about me by now, our feeble human eyelids only block about 93.8% of all light, but with the awesome power of the Manta Sleep Mask, I am literally staring directly into this lamp and I can't see or taste anything. The Manta Sleep Masks have eye cups that put zero pressure on my fragile little eyeballs, and even better, the thin material makes great for side sleepers like me, thanks to their extremely thin and adjustable Bluetooth speaker design. Plus, with how incredibly adjustable the sleep masks are, it's ridiculously easy to get the right fit no matter how freakishly scary your weird head may be.
Okay, honestly, though, I can only think of, like, when are you going to bed that this would be a problem? I mean, like, just go to bed at night and, you know, close your curtains. That should be good enough.
Even better, since the Manta Sleep Masks aren't legally classified as weapons, I can take them anywhere, like on a plane, because sleeping on planes just sucks. There is no joke here. I am absolutely bringing this thing on my next flight. Oh my god. And with tons of options and price points, even the pickiest of eaters can find the right mask to suit their tastes.
Okay, honestly, I don't think, has he said anything about why this has a power button on it? Like, what does this, it's a sleep mask. Like, why does it need power?
Like this one here that's made with 30 mommy silk. Sweet dreams. So click on the link in the description or use promo code Cheeseyeen at checkout for 10% off your Manta Sleep Mask and a sleep so deep you'll be dreaming of complex railroad logistics. Legitimately, I did actually dream of freight and railroad logistics the night after writing the main body of this script. I went that deep into researching railroads. I have actually put more effort into researching this video than I have for several term papers for my master's degree. So,
as you should.
With the preamble out of the way, let's go ahead and answer the question, does the railroad in Choo Choo Charles make sense? And is the game scary?
Viewing the world's first fruit.
We start the game with a fun bit of backstory. Our good buddy Eugene Soon Dead has called us to the island of Aranirum for a monster hunt to add another specimen to our monster museum. After following the world's fastest geriatric man, we come upon the train that we're going to be spending most of the game in, which I'm going to name Timothy for clarity. Now, I could go into Tim the Tank Engine's design, but I want to lay down the structure of this video before things go off the rails, and yes, I intended that pun because I'm not a fucking coward. Puns are funny, eat shit. Part 1 of this video is going to cover most of the horror and gameplay, while part 2 will cover the reason most of you probably clicked on this video, which will take the form of a personal tour around the island to look at all the various locations that can give us some insight as to how the island's rail system works. So if you're only interested in that, you can skip to this part of the video or click the chapter marker in the description.
Well, I'm tempted. I mean, I wouldn't make a very good reaction video if I only reacted to part of the video, so I'm in this for the long haul.
But back to the game itself, there's really only 3 things to talk about: the plot, the combat, and Charles himself. And speaking of plot, Eugene dies immediately. Well, okay, not immediately, but he is definitely in the process of dying due to his terminal stanky leg. And he tells us that in order to get the plot moving, we need to find 3 eggs that the island owner, Senor Banana Pants, has locked away in 3 different mines. And that's really it. Everything else we learn through various notes left around the map, and it's nothing we haven't seen before in like a bajillion other horror stories. Some stand in for the individualism-crushing nature of late-stage capitalism, digs too deep and finds a monster, tries to keep it hush-hush while also looking to see if they can somehow make a profit off of this ancient demon. You know, it's kind of funny how what was once seen as over-the-top evil in Alien has kind of just become, yeah. Hell, that attitude even extends to the townfolk. Talking to most of them, they just seem mildly annoyed that a giant spider demon is running around their island, acting like he's little more than an aggressive coyote that keeps causing fairy tale levels of mischief.
I mean, admittedly, when you're around, like, Charles doesn't go into buildings, so as long as you're in a house or something, like, you should be safe. Until you make him angry, which, you know, only happens at the end of the game.
Sorry, but this guy is eating literally everything living that it can find, and the most distressed person on this island is the pickle lady.
I need my pickle!
Even the cultists seem pretty chill about everything. They're just hanging around, whistling to themselves and spouting generic Skyrim one-liners when they spot you.
Get him! Shouldn't be here!
Even then, they're not doing this out of fanatical devotion. They're literally being paid by the corrupt town boss Warren to cosplay as cultists in the hopes that it'll appease Charles. This is by far the most nonchalant horror setting I've ever been in. And I kind of love it. I would love a passive mode for this game, where I could just sort of putter around, explore the island, and take in the gloomy atmosphere. But moving away from my desire to vacation in Silent Hill, it's pretty clear that the story is more of an afterthought, though there's nothing wrong with a simple story in a horror game.
I mean, if I do remember, because, like, I think I came across, you know, the actual, the game devs, what is it? I'm forgetting what he's called. But I came across his YouTube videos, and, like, I followed him for a while as he was developing the game. And yeah, I mean, he didn't really have that much on the actual story of the game. It was more just, you know, design decisions, how he did this, how he did that, you know, that sort of fun stuff. And I mean, again, like, this is the kind of game where it's very tongue-in-cheek. Yes, it's a horror game, quote-unquote, but, like, it knows exactly what it is, and it treats itself accordingly.
In the end, this is a very small game with a very simple concept. Killing Thomas the Tank Engine. Even if technically Charles is closer to James in design, I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Speaking of, this is probably a good time as any to talk about the titular train's design. And it's a bit of a mixed bag. In the past, I've stated that mascot horror is best when it's subtle, and Charles's design can best be described as somebody skinned a clown and plastered its face over a freight train. And I don't know about you, but last I checked, neither clowns nor freight trains are known for their subtlety. Yeah, put that on a shirt and sell it. Charles has the same problem as Senorita Delicia, where her initial reveal is shocking, but the more you see it, the more you get used to it, making him less scary every time he shoves his face in the camera. But to be fair, he's a giant spider train parody of Thomas the Tank Engine, so something tells me subtlety isn't exactly a priority for this game. Now, if this game were different, say taking place in an abandoned train depot while we tried to suss out Charles from the real trains as he stalked us, then I'd have more of a problem with it. But that's not what this game is about. It's about shooting Charles directly in the face over and over with the heaviest ordnance we can find. So again, I reiterate, subtlety is not this game's priority.
As I said, the game knows what it is, and it treats you accordingly.
Wiring that heavy ordnance, meanwhile, is largely the main focus of the game while we go on our egg hunt. Aranerum Island is littered with various stops along the way, usually consisting of short missions to collect more scrap to upgrade our train's speed, offense, or defense, or to collect additional weapons. The majority of these optional missions consist of go here to get a thing and bring it back to me, or 90% of all Alliance quests in World of Warcraft. The reason these quests usually consist of walk here and get a thing is because Alliance players are terrible, but the reason the quests are like this in Choo Choo Charles is because of Charles himself. He's absolutely a threat to your train, but he's an even bigger threat to you and your desire to not
Wait, I'm sorry. Wait, why? Markiplier? Huh? Wait.
die. With the exception of a few areas, like this Slender in the 8 Pages tribute that I'm not going to bother talking about because it's legit just Slender in the 8 Pages, there's not much to say. Charles is always skulking around somewhere on the island, so the feeling of vulnerability when you're out in the open is fantastic. You can often hear his whistle in the distance, but the mountains and tree cover make it difficult to judge just how close he is, and the image of his silhouette moving through the forest is terrifying as you creep around so very far away from the safety of your metal box.
Honestly, it's the whole thing where, like, even if the game really is, it's small, it's short, and it's rather cheap, like, the actual, like, amount of atmosphere the game actually has is rather spectacular for, for just the amount of work that actually went into it.
Is what I would be saying if he ever actually bothered to show up while I was on foot. Yeah, it happened again. Not once when I was out doing these side missions did Charles ever actually appear to chase me, which is really frustrating because the whole dynamic of leaving the safety of your train and scurrying back when you hear him coming is kind of half the appeal of this game. Not to mention one of my favorite horror mechanics in general. I mean, for Faz's sake, that's 90% of the reason I call the daycare in FNAF Security Breach one of the only 2 scary parts of the game. Or at least when Moon's AI is actually functional and not just tripping balls. As I said before, the whole dynamic of
even again, after all these years, Security Breach is such a broken.
being forced to leave a safe spot to run around a big open area filled with danger is legit one of my favorite interactions in a horror game, just because of how primal it is. You're constantly looking over your shoulder, senses at full alert for any flicker of danger. But instead of any of that delicious horror, Charles never once showed up and I was left with my concerning horror fixation entirely untickled. Kind of frustrating that I keep getting horror cucked like this, first with Bendy in part 3 and 5, and now with Charles, though maybe it's my fault for coming on too strong. So, for sake of argument, let's say Charles did chase me around on foot a few times. Would this have added to the horror?
Yes.
But would it have changed my opinion
probably.
of the game?
No.
I have a frankly disturbing love for threats that can come at me from anywhere at any time, and Charles is a fantastic example of that. For example, the way his whistle echoes in the distance is brilliant, because unlike a signal that guarantees the monster is about to chase you, like in that one really bad Silent Hill game, Charles's whistle is not
Oh wait, they called Game Grumps Markiplier. Okay.
a guarantee he'll show up. It's just a warning to let the player know that he's nearby, which is brilliant to add to the uncertainty and fear of the situation. Problem is, a single scary mechanic does not a horror game make. The only other 2 sources of threat on the island are the random cultists, which I'll talk about later, and the fights with Charles. Those fights are tense, sure, but tension and horror are not quite the same thing. Related, absolutely, but tension doesn't always beget horror, as horror is incredibly complex and context sensitive.
Yeah, and it's also completely different for everybody. Like, for me, I hate horror. Truly, I've never watched horror movies unless unless I know what's actually going to happen, and I have other people there that kind of like enjoy it with me. And as I said before, I love FNAF as a series, but I'm very much in the camp of the people that have never actually played the game, but just try to figure out what the lore is.
For example, while I'm going for a lap 2 in Pizza Tower, that's also tense, but it's not what I'd call scary. To keep with the pizza topic, because I really want pizza now, Fellini's for life, tension is like a good dough with which to start, but without the ingredients coordinated in the right way, you're just gonna end up with a disgusting mess. And this is where a lesser man would make a pineapple on pizza joke, but damn it, pineapple on pizza is good. There are
Modern, no, it's not. Honestly, I've said this before, and you want good pineapple on pizza, you do it the way it was originally made, where instead of just having a chunk of pineapple on the pizza, what you do is you actually cut it and like thinly slice it, and then you put those thin slices on the pizza so that when it's cooking, they almost kind of like dissolve into the pizza itself. When it comes to just having the big chunk of fruit on there, it's like, ugh.
or any number of ingredients you can add to the dough of tension to make a good horror pizza. The unknown, helplessness, high stakes, story context, game mechanics, monster design, the list is gigantic, and this is one reason I find horror so fascinating. There is no essence of horror. There is no one thing that will guarantee a situation is scary because human fear is incredibly complex. In the context of Charles chases, like I said before, they're tense, but are really only on the border of being scary. They follow a very set pattern of what's going to happen. So while the first couple of times you fight him might be scary, you very quickly learn the exact formula of these fights, which takes away a lot of the fear. And in addition, the threat of Charles drastically diminishes once you get the rocket launcher. I have yet to find a game that stays scary once it hands you a rocket launcher. Speaking of, while I've talked about it before, I want to at least touch on the idea of fighting back in horror games because it's actually a pretty nuanced topic. Fighting back is a huge part of Ding Ding Dave, but it's rather unique in that fighting back takes the form of an infinite ammo rail shooter. Now on paper, this seems awful for horror. I know I've accused games of this in the past, but this fight is literally on rails, and to top it off, you have a gun with infinite ammo.
The only like downside, quote unquote, to it, or at least is the fact that the weapon is only on the rear of the train, which means the few times that Charles comes at you from the front, he's going to get a free hit in.
There's a catch to it. Each of these fights has potential long-term consequences. Even once your train gets powered up and the risk of death is far less, Chargin' Chuck is always going to manage to strip at least a little bit of your health, which costs you scrap to repair. Run out of scrap, and it's only a matter of time before Charles wears you down and eventually kills you, which I just realized I'm going to have to find outside footage for because I never actually died in this game. And the fact that these fights are literally on rails is also fine because it's only on rails in the literal sense. This isn't a scripted chase where every last event is pre-planned by the game.
Oh, Molly McCall, why? I'm still upset that she was killed.
Each fight is dynamic, with Charles responding both to the terrain and your own shots. You need to act and react to Charles when he chases you down. Switch guns, repair your train, all in an effort to not die. The final source of tension and gameplay comes from the Charles cultists around the island who
Yeah, given that you can't fight them at all other than on your train.
protect the eggs and other miscellaneous areas. They're fine. Aside from wearing impressively manufactured masks, like legit where are they getting the supplies for these, they just kind of wander around in set patterns or chase you down with shotguns apparently filled with glitter and piss for all the damage it does to you. They're pretty easy to avoid in general and also lack basic threat awareness because I don't know about you, but my response to the guy who just jumped into a heavily armored train isn't stand still and wait to be shot in the face by a bazooka. The final fight with Charles too is just fine. Assembling all the eggs causes him to go beast mode, and unlike Bendy who did this for no reason, this is explicitly what we were trying to do. Money match him in a 1v1 Fox-only Final Destination deathmatch. It's loud and fun and pretty damn satisfying to actually do some real damage to the bastard after he's been hounding you all game.
Charles.
And the ending is honestly a really cool death scene that I have to censor because of YouTube. And that's really it. Overall, the game is fine. It's a little scary at times, but it was always meant to be a simple game that doesn't really leave much to be overanalyzed like I tend to do, which is why I had to find a different thing to overanalyze because, damn it, how could I call myself a real content creator if I'm not spending an exorbitant amount of time overanalyzing something entirely trivial which the devs probably didn't even think all that much about.
Now onto the trains!
We'll go into a bit more depth on my thoughts on the game itself at the end, but now it's time for the real meat of this video. And honestly, this whole does the railroad and Choo Choo Charles make sense idea turned out to be a lot more interesting than I thought. There are a lot of finer details that really tell a fun story of how this island operated before Tink Tank Tony showed up. So let's get all this boring spider demon horror out of the way and talk about something that's really fun. Railroad logistics.
Yes! Yes!
The last thing we need to do before starting our grand island tour is to examine the train that we'll be conducting. And in brief, this thing is a fucking abomination.
Yes.
Now, there are plenty of nitpicks with this thing's design I could go over, and I briefly will. The train has a steam whistle, but no actual steam whistle on the outside. Why so many wheels? The most pathetic cow catcher I've ever seen. You don't drive a train with 3 sticks. Why so many wheels? Why do the so many wheels not have a connecting rod? How are the so many wheels being powered? Why so many wheels? Nitpicks aside,
I mean, okay, so I will say this, like, for the so many wheels question, like, given that this is a mine railroad, and let's, ignore, everything else about the engine and assume that, in some universe it actually is steam powered. when you're dealing with something like a mining railroad, if you look at, like, for example, like a lot of engines that were designed for coal hauling, like delivering coal or like delivering like long lines of coal, you'll notice that a lot of them have a lot of powered wheels. Why? So that you have more points of contact to actually put the engine's strength on the down line, so to speak. Like, there's a couple of, I'll show a couple of examples that actually point this out previously from, is it Bulgaria? Yes, from Bulgaria. Thank you, locomotives. But if we go down to the 12 coupled locomotives page, you can see here one example from Bulgaria, an O12O, and if you scroll down a little bit more, a 212-4, that the whole point of this is, like, lots of little wheels that can give a lot of torque to pull long, heavy trains. And if I remember correctly, I think the engine you drive around in Choo Choo Charles, it's like an O10O. So that's not out of the realm of possibilities. The only flaw is, like, an O10, like an all-driver engine like this would do horribly on the island because the track is so windy and bendy and uneven. Like, the train would have such an unstable ride. You'd honestly need something more like a Shay or a Climax or a Heisler. Engines that were designed, again, to have all-powered wheels, go very slowly, but were specifically designed with, like, turnable trucks like a modern diesel engine or something, to help ride along on uneven track.
The most striking feature of TIM and steam engines in general is this cylindrical bit on the front,
known
as the boiler. This is where, and I need you to follow me here, the steam engine boils water to create steam to power the engine. Hence the name, steam engine.
Honestly, I know for me, this is like, I literally knew all this. Like, I'll show you, like, this is only a small... if I haven't said it before, I know a lot about steam trains. Like, I'll show you a bit of my collection here. Hey, come on. Whoa. That's my physical reading material. Like, I really don't want to have to put this away right now, so I'm just gonna let it sit on my bed. And that's not forgetting the fact that, you know, that's forgetting, you know, all the model trains I had there at the basement of my dad's house, and this little piece of rail that I have. It's, if I remember correctly, right down the bottom, it's a chunk from the track between Ottawa and Montreal. It was given to me back in 2003. Yeah, this is a solid piece of steel right here.
Problem is, this train is absolutely not a steam engine, and the reason is the fuel. In terms of fuel efficiency, steam engines are incredibly inefficient. Only about 5% of the energy burned in a coal steam engine is turned into actual power.
Yeah.
Engineers were constantly pouring literal tons of coal into these engines just to get from one stop to another.
There's another thing. God, I'm going to be pausing this section a lot, aren't I? I just realized. But a good example of it was, so for anybody here that's watched Top Gear before, there was one episode where Jeremy Clarkson, James May, and Richard Hammond, they all did a race that was like, oh, what if Top Gear existed in the 60s? And they had, like, James May drove, like, the fastest car in the world at the time. Richard Hammond rode the fastest motorcycle at the time. And Jeremy Clarkson got to ride a steam, well, not to ride, but he actually got to fire a steam locomotive, which the locomotive he fired was actually the Tornado, which, if I remember correctly, I don't know if there's been any more, but I think at this point it is still like one of the newest steam locomotives in Britain. It's what's known as an A1 Pacific, and it was built because none of the originals had ever actually been preserved, like, in any way. So they literally just built, over the course of years of raising money, they built a brand new one. And Jeremy was on the footplate helping fire it. And if I remember correctly, they said that that thing has a top speed. It tops out of just over 100 miles an hour. And if I remember correctly, the engineer that was actually driving said that you have that when it's going at top speed, you basically have to shovel like 5 pounds of coal for every mile you travel at top speed.
At race speed, the train needed 33 pounds of coal every mile.
That's God, it's like if it wasn't for that's exactly the reason why like other railroads, specifically in North America, started getting automatic stokers. To save just, the fireman's back.
As opposed to the 5% energy conversion of a coal steam train, your car's engine turns about 25% of the energy from gasoline into motion. Also consider that gasoline is almost twice as energy dense as coal, and we can make the scientific conclusion that steam trains need a shit ton of coal to work. This is why so many trains had tenders, extra wagons attached to the back that could carry both coal and water, as they needed these tenders to actually get from point to point. Now in fairness, Tim here is a much smaller engine covering a much smaller area, so wouldn't need as much overall fuel.
And also,
Plus, there were absolutely steam trains that didn't use tender cars. However, they still carried large amounts of additional fuel.
Yeah, the whole thing with, as they're actually called tank engines, and those Bulgarian engines I showed you before, like, they were tank engines, and the reason you would go for a tank engine over a tender engine if you didn't need to, if you didn't have to use one, is simply because of weight. The whole thing, like, one of the main things that makes trains so efficient at transporting cargo and stuff like that is steel wheels on steel rails. There's not a lot of friction going on there, but that lack of friction also can come back to bite you when you actually need to start moving. So that's a part of the whole thing where, adhesive weight, if you have an engine that has all drivers, then all of the weight is going onto the driving wheels to help get started or stop. And if you have a tank engine, you have not only the weight of the engine, but the weight of the fuel as well. Though, the downside of that is as you use up the fuel, then your adhesive weight also decreases, so you can get kind of... the results can be a bit inconsistent at times.
Stored on the engine in various compartments, typically in large boxes on the side of the boiler or behind the engineers in an extension of the cab itself. Also, fun fact, these fuel-carrying engines are the type of trains that we call tank engines, as in Thomas the. Tim here, however, absolutely does not have any apparent space for tender, but maybe it did. One thing I immediately noted while playing is how absolutely massive the cab is. Compare this cab to the one that existed even in the massive, more modern diesel engines I toured at the Nickel Plate Railroad Museum. I have literally slept in hotel bathrooms with less space than this, and no, I am not going to explain why I have so much experience in that department.
Though that being said, there are engines like that. I mean, for one, there is a type of tank engine called a well tank, where the water tanks are actually between the wheels and the frames. And while it does lead to less water capacity overall, it also does lead to a lower center of gravity. And also, there is such a thing as an observation engine, where if I pull up a picture of one... Ah, perfect, right here. You can see this poor thing is decked out to look like a passenger car. Why? Because they were specifically designed to go along tracks so you could have crews inspecting the track to see how well to see what the quality was and if it needed, like, repair or stuff like that. And this is just one example. Like, on big railroads, you have, like, stuff like this. On, like, smaller railroads, they'd often be a lot more put together, I guess would be the right word. Like, I wish I could find the picture of it, but I saw one once where it was literally it was this tiny little, like, 2-axled engine, like, had a driving wheel and a leading wheel. That was all, and all it had was just a large platform with a chair sitting on the front, and that was the entire observation platform.
I also noted this weird hanger off at the back that I couldn't quite wrap my head around. At first, I thought it was a custom modification to support the gun, but no, now I think the train was modified in a different way, and I hate that it kinda makes sense. Something iconic about steam engines that Tim doesn't have is the plume of smoke belching from his smokestack. Now granted, a lot of the time in modern steam trains, the amount of smoke is exaggerated by the engineers because, let's be honest, it looks really fucking cool. Tim, however, produces almost nothing, because Tim is not a steam engine. Tim is a diesel. More specifically, Tim was a steam tank engine that someone Frankensteined into a diesel, which according to some train enthusiasts is the absolute scariest part of this entire game.
Honestly, and yeah, again, like, remember what I said before about Shays, like, Climaxes, Heislers? They were all geared locomotives. And some of them did exist long enough that in some places, they were converted to diesels because all you had to do was take the cab off, rip the boiler off, and connect like an internal combustion engine to the already existing jack shaft just to, keep things running. And I think I have a couple of pictures of those saved. Here's one from Canadian Forest Products Limited. You can quite literally see here. It's a shade that they just took the top off of. They have the engines under here, and instead of having the shaft at the side driven by steam cylinders, they just have it done by like a chain or something. Yeah, so it's not... While it does suck, it's not unheard of. Now, doing that in modern day with a preserved steam locomotive, that is basically heresy, because you're basically like destroying history. If you're gonna do that, it's cheaper just to build a new engine that looks like a steam engine than runs on diesel. In fact, I think they actually have that in Japan. It's like a little restored tram line where they have like steam outlined little like diesel engines where I think it actually has like a built-in turntable where there's like in between the wheels, there's a piston that will push down, lift the engine just far enough for the wheels to clear the ground so they can turn the engine around on the spot and then lower it back down onto the tracks. It is really cool. If I can find the footage, I'll put it in the video.
But it fits. While rare, some smaller trains, usually switcher trains nearing the end of their lifespan, were converted from coal to diesel. This explains several of the prior anomalies about Tim. For one, his unusually large cab may have been where the onboard coal and water boxes were stored. It was fairly common for switcher trains to be tank engines, so upon Tim's conversion to diesel, the coal box could have been taken out entirely to allow for more room in the cab.
Honestly, I mean, looking back before, it wouldn't have been that far out off the side. Because, again, there's a whole thing, if you didn't know, called loading gauge. And when you're dealing with the actual size of a locomotive, or trains just in general, there's two things you have to worry about. Track gauge and loading gauge. Track gauge is the distance between the inside of the rails. That's how wide the wheels are on your engine or your rolling stock or whatever. Loading gauge is basically the size of everything else, like how tall are signals, how tall are tunnels, how wide they are. Or something like that, you very rarely, well, not very rarely, you would never have a tank that's wider than, the engine by much, because then you risk not being able to fit places. I very much imagine that with the way this engine is designed, probably either well tank with a bunker on the back for the coal, or maybe you had some sort of some North American commuter engines did it, where it was like the back was like, with the boiler being so big, you had both the water and the coal behind the cab, like right here.
Him being diesel also explains why Tim has no firebox, the spot where the engineer actually shovels the coal into the boiler. This also explains the lack of smoke coming from the smokestack, as diesel engines produce significantly less smoke than coal or wood. This even explains why Tim has no connecting rod between his wheels, because look at what the hell my friend and I found at the Nickel Plate Railroad Museum.
I got you now, you fucking moron bitch.
An honest to Thomas diesel engine about the same size as Tim. Like, holy fuck, what were the odds of that? And when looking at this diesel switcher, what do we find? Well, while it doesn't have 5 billion wheels like Tim does, this one doesn't have a connecting rod, as the wheels receive power directly from the engine. Purchasing a cheap diesel train also makes sense for the island of Aranerum itself. This is an island that requires all supplies to be shipped in via small ferries, and steam trains require a lot of heavy coal. Diesel is far more efficient ton for ton, meaning it would have been easier and likely cheaper to supply their trains with diesel than coal. Furthermore, having smaller amounts of smoke produced by their trains is incredibly important for a mining town. Coal trains passing by mines, depending on airflow, could greatly pollute the already not great air quality inside, which is yet another point in favor of Tim being a diesel train. But now we have to ask the question, why would the island buy a coal converted to diesel engine instead of just a diesel engine outright?
Because it was probably cheaper.
Price. Again, most coal to diesel conversions were done on much older trains near...
Okay, that's not actually a conversion. That's just a steam engine. They are, I think they're called Sentinel engines. Very very purely for industrial work, but they operate at a very high pressure. Like I think if I remember correctly, because I know this video, I watched Laurie's Mechanical Marvels. I think this one has like a boiler pressure of like over 400 psi or something like that.
Nearing the end of their lifespan. Often switcher trains in a town like this doesn't exactly scream doing all that great to me. And with our magnificent vessel puzzled out, I say it's finally time we start the grand Aranerum tour. The first stop is actually the train shed where we see Tim for the first time. And I really don't have much to say here other than it's about what you'd expect from a small train shed. So let's actually get moving, shall we? Now as we start chugging along, I want to take a look at the overall map of Aranerum. Something to note is that this map does not show every rail line in the map, just the ones that we can go on. Remember that, it's going to be really important later. In terms of a small mining operation, the rail network is a bit dense but otherwise not too unrealistic. For comparison, we can look to the real-world example of the Birmingham Mineral Railroad. While somewhat larger than the island of Aranerum, we can still see a similar pattern of various nested loops to better service the various mines. But of course, that means we have to figure out if this is actually what Choo Choo Charles did. Continuing down the line, we pass a few basic non-train related structures, but more importantly, we come upon a small informal train graveyard. We can actually find an identical version of our own train that's been left out to rust along with some abandoned minecarts. In fact, our Tim is the only train we ever actually see running. This immediately tells me that the island has started using precision scheduled railroading. And don't worry if that joke didn't make sense, the whole 3 of my viewers who are also railroad workers are pointing at the screen and going, ah, right now.
You don't have to be a railroad worker. Just look it up. It's basically most of the problems that modern railroads have, specifically in North America, is because of precision scheduled railroading. It's bad. It's purely, it doesn't help anybody except, the big wigs at the top.
Maybe, I'm not actually sure. Legit, I could actually use some feedback on that joke there because, full disclosure, I am flying so fucking blind here. But what I find most interesting in this small graveyard is these boxcars, as this is not the kind of car I would expect to typically find in a mining operation. And yet, it ends up making a lot of sense for the island of Aranerum. Historically, the transportation of minerals or ores was done via either gondola cars or hopper cars. A gondola car is basically just an open-topped car used for transporting bulk material, while a hopper car is similar in design but has various hoppers underneath. These were vastly preferable for hauling loose items such as minerals for a number of reasons. Top-loading piles of rocks is significantly easier as you can just pour the cargo into the car with some kind of chute or hopper. By comparison, most boxcars loaded cargo via side doors, which of course would have the product just spill out everywhere if you tried to open a boxcar full of rocks.
Though that being said, I think it was, what was it, like in the 80s or something? I think somebody did try to come up with a bopper car. It was a box car with hopper capabilities. I think it was to, if I remember correctly, I think it was to try to solve the issue of running empty trains. Because, railways, they make their money by transporting goods. So, but the thing is, cars, they don't teleport. They have to be carried somewhere. So, like, let's say like a hopper train, like you're gonna you have it go empty one way, fill up with say like grain or something, and then you come back with it full. But that one way of it going empty was just a complete waste of time and money. So somebody said, oh hey, let's try to make a car that would be able to work in more instances where it can go full in both directions so that to save time and money. And let's just say it failed because they were so just complex and just unreliable.
However, boxcars were occasionally known to haul coal, and pretty much anything really. As stated by famous railroad industrial engineer John Nealing, we have the boxcar and you can adapt to it, which really sounds like something a Melee player would say. We have Fox and you can adapt to it.
You have a one-frame option off of drill! You have lasers! You have 19 recoveries!
That is the second Melee joke I've made in this guy. I don't even play Melee. And I believe that's exactly what Aranerum did. But to explain that, we need to make our first stop at one of Aranerum's many mines. Immediately, we can see that there are tracks specifically for the minecarts, since the gauge here is far too small for our train to ride on. What's interesting to me is that these tracks don't lead to any kind of storage or conveyor belt or other structure. They pull up right next to the main line and then just stop. Now, if you think you've figured out what's going on here, you probably have, because it's kind of dumb. But I want to keep talking about the island first, so keep that juicy, turgid theory of yours tucked tight inside your brain britches.
I mean, I'd imagine it's simply because, the railway mine, whatever was happening here was so cheap. They literally just had, bring the stuff out of the mine, then shovel it straight onto the car, and then send the mine carts back in to, fill up again. I mean, that's pretty much what they did in British railroading when it came to, like, refueling their engines. Like, if you look at, like, North American railroading, whenever you'd have the big yards, you'd have, the big coaling towers where the engine would back up under and it drops the coal right underneath. And it would be automatic, basically. You'd have the full hopper load up on a different, pull up onto a different, like, line, dump its load, it'd be like, carried up via conveyor and stored. In some British yards, basically, you'd get the engine fired, you'd pull it to a siding where there'd just be a big, like, a wooden a bin of it next to the track, and you'd have the crew literally just with shovels shoveling the coal from the bin into the tender just to fill it up.
Stop that.
Moving on, we eventually arrive, after a brief demon attack, at a small station with a junction, technically making this a junction station. We can also see a type of siding here. Sidings are secondary rails used for any number of functions, but this one here is most likely a passing siding, specifically in a main and loop setup. This can exist for a number of reasons, but largely it's made to allow other trains to bypass the station if there is another train already stopped there. We can actually see a different type of siding loop in the train shed at the beginning of the game, one with 2 sidings and a through road. But coming back to the junction station, you'll notice that this station also has 2 sidings and a through road to accompany its other siding on the outside. This is a tad unusual, but it would make sense if this station was also a loading dock. The main and loop setup would allow this station to load multiple boxcars while not blocking the overall rail system, while the sidings and through road would allow this one station to store quite a bit of rolling stock. Lending to the theory that this is a loading station is what we find if we follow these tracks here, and since we can't take Tim here, we're gonna have to go on foot. Following the tracks, we can see that this was a route up through nothing. It just kinda ends. But this isn't really all that unrealistic.
Oh, come on, really? You gotta do
Directly
cheap and
above
dirty
where
like
this
that?
track runs out is a wooden footbridge that apparently goes nowhere. Now, people don't typically build bridges for no reason, so this had to have gone somewhere. And my theory is that this entire branch of the rail network once led to a mine shaft that has since dried out. We can even see this defunct boxcar halfway up, along with this random goober guarding apparently nothing. What's his story, do you think? Why was he given empty quarry guarding duty? Is he happy with how much he's getting paid? Is being a shotgun-wielding cultist technically count as employment? Well, to answer that question, we need to ask someone from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Too bad I don't know anyone from the Bureau of Labor Statistics.
Okay, I was going to be really surprised there if he actually did.
One last feature of this junction station that I want to talk about is this water tank here. Water stops were locations where steam trains would replenish their stores of water necessary for operation. However, I don't think this is actually a water stop. Water towers were almost always used in water stops, but we never see a single water tower in Aranerum. What we do see, however, is plenty of these water tanks collecting rainwater around various houses. Thus, I don't believe that this water tank is actually for supplying steam engines. Rather, this is probably just drinking water. Remember, this station is also a loading dock and would have any number of burly, sweaty men carrying heavy loads through this station. They gon' get thirsty. Pulling out, we have a bit of a loop back around to get back on track, so while we're just chugging along, I want to talk a bit more about the overall rail layout on the island. Aranerum's rail line is what is known as a single-track railway. A single-track railway is just a railway that only uses one track. This is opposed to a double-track railway, which, and you're never gonna believe this one, uses 2 railways. I would absolutely expect this small island to use a single-track railway, as these are far cheaper to build and maintain, but do require some additional logistics to prevent, death.
I mean, you have so many loops and stuff like that. I don't think it'd be that hard to, avoid other trains on the route, on the line. And on top of that, like, from what we saw at the shed at the very beginning of the game, when it looked like if there were only like 3 berths, that means there were probably only 3 engines on the island. So, I mean, hopefully it wouldn't be that hard to keep track of where they were at, any given point.
There is one exception to this layout, however, and that's this area here that has rails so close together it might as well be a double track. I won't get into that just yet, as this has more to do with the operations of the island, but I wanted to point it out because it had me very intrigued when I first noticed it. Back to single track railways, they can have trains running in opposite directions, but obviously this is going to require significant coordination to avoid something really, really cool from happening. However, I don't think the Aranerum Railway actually made use of trains running in opposite directions, specifically because of how their junctions are set up. Looking at the map, we only see rail switches facing a single direction of travel, specifically counterclockwise around the map. Rail switches are the actual, switches that allow a train to move to one track or the other. At no point did I ever see these switches running for these junctions here, which means that if there were a train running clockwise, they wouldn't be able to control which track they're headed down. Further confirming this idea is the complete lack of any signaling on the island. Signaling is, at least in the context of collision avoidance, a way to tell the engineer if the track ahead is clear or not. There are a good number of ways to do this, and we see absolutely none of them here.
The only I was about to say, the only time we see it on the island is just lights pointing to which way the track is.
Only fixed signals we see are on the switches, and these only indicate which way the switch is directing the train. And even then, these switches are so primitive that they require the engineer to stop the train, get out, and manually change the switch themselves. These types of manual railroad switches did exist, but even in the early 1900s were almost always used for extremely low-trafficked railways. However, this lack of signaling is not without precedent. There exists one very early and, perhaps more importantly, cheap method of railroad signaling. So cheap that it's not technically signaling at all. timetable operation. This is a type of railroad operation that prevents collisions by having fixed timetables. This means that engines are only on certain lines at certain times. For example, if I were working on timetable A, my train would be scheduled to be on this line at this time, and the engineers working on timetable B would be aware of this and thus know not to go on my line. Now, if you've ever worked on any kind of group project ever, you already know all the reasons this kind of operation just straight up sucks. But to spell it out, in a group project, missing your deadline will make you feel like you're about to die. On a railroad, missing your deadline will guarantee it. In short, this timetable system combined with the manual railroad switches is extremely uncommon and frankly stupidly dangerous, and also makes perfect sense for the island of Aranirum. But we need to save that for the conclusion, as we've reached our next stop, an explosives observation bunker. Why does the island have this? Because the rocket launcher we get was handmade by one of the island's employees.
Yeah, so probably the bunker was also handmade with whatever concrete and rebar they could find.
And what does that tell us? That mine boss Warren doesn't just ignore OSHA regulations, he creates new ones. I have absolutely zero doubt that Warren was paying this guy under the table to make cheap, improvised explosives, and now I immediately understand why this island has such a large cache of guns. Gotta keep the Union reps away somehow. I mean, really, if you remove the whole demon train, this entire operation would be the wet dream of Jim Venna. Yeah, go ahead and lie in the comments, say you got that joke. But moving on to one of our last stops, we get to this structure which I'm pretty sure isn't actually part of the railroad's infrastructure. Aside from this building, which is just a Motel 6, we have two towers here overlooking the rails. If this were positioned in a more complex junction, I'd probably say that it's an interlocking tower, but that's obviously not the case for several reasons. Interlocking towers, sometimes called switch houses, are a centralized location that's able to remotely flip the railroad switches of a nearby junction or junctions. However, there's only one junction nearby, and as previously established, Aranirum has no apparent signaling or switch control, and just uses a timetable setup for its trains. And also, I couldn't find any actual switching machinery inside. I feel like I should probably just started with that one. In the end, I think it's just employee lodging. It's a weird place for it, and I'm not sure why it's built so tall, but with these two common rooms in this storage shed, it's really the only thing I can think of. And after that, the only stop left we have are these final two mines, at least in terms of any real railroad infrastructure. There's not much new here for us, and we can once again see that there's no real loading facilities for moving the mine product into the boxcars. Once again, the mines here seem to rely heavily on really stupid uses of manual labor, and honestly, that can be used to sum up the Aranirum Railroad perfectly. Really stupid uses of manual labor. But unfortunately, it all makes perfect sense. Now,
honestly, when you start looking into it, how like ramshackle some of these smaller operations could get, it is honestly terrifying. So honestly, it does not surprise me in the slightest.
Now, it shouldn't, and I am just slightly extremely frustrated that this railroad actually kind of works, and I will eat my entire house if the if the developer actually planned out anything that I said or am going to say. But here we go anyway, an overview of Aranirum's railroad and why it actually works. Buckle up, it's gonna be a ride. First, we need to start by judging whether or not the overall layout of the railroad makes sense. Aranirum's mining operation is rather small and lacks any kind of industrial equipment outside of the rail network, meaning that all of the extraction of ore is done via pickaxes, shovels, and good old muscle. This is an extremely slow process, and as such, these trains probably aren't running all that often. That does make the timetables far more easy to manage and makes the manual switches far more feasible. A good number of houses or other facilities aren't located too far from many of these switches, so employees stationed or living there could follow the timetable and turn the switches between the relatively infrequent trains.
And on top of that, it doesn't look like the island actually has that large of a permanent population. So I mean, for all I could imagine, it could be one of those things where the railroad just pulled double duty and also just acted as common carrier for everything else for what little other traffic it actually did pull.
However, this low frequency of trains fails to explain this section of double track that I mentioned earlier in the video for audience retention purposes. This area specifically being double tracked tells me that this line here is so heavily trafficked that it required a line going both north and south at the same time. Well, what do we find both here and here? Another mine and the demonic temple to Charles. Did you forget this game was about a demon? When these two caves were first being excavated, this would have output a lot of both ore and useless waste rock. And again, again, the lack of proper mining equipment would have made loading these trains a very slow process. So this double track was likely added to allow a train to be stopped on one of these double tracks while still allowing traffic to flow. Finally, the lack of infrastructure such as interlocking towers and fixed signals makes sense given the business practices of the worst dressed man in the world here. Frankly put, bro is so comically inept and obsessed with cost cutting that I feel like he could have been a villain in Outer Worlds. Shoutouts to my Outer Worlds fans, by the way. I'm sure all 6 of us are gonna have a great time with the sequel, but this focus on cost cutting seems to clash with just how extensive the actual railroad is. Remember, this map only shows the lines that we can go on. There are plenty of branch lines around the island, not to mention all the track for minecarts.
I mean, I could very much see it as just being, you know, tracks and stuff that were just left there to rot once mines and other things stopped being profitable. Like, oh, the island might have at one point had, you know, many more mines, but then, you know, those mines dried up and stopped, you know, producing as much, so they just stopped, you know, sending trains down there and built them to other places. No, I mean, I don't know why you do that and like, instead of, you know, ripping up the old track to reuse in other places, but, you know, again, upper management can be really stupid sometimes.
I expect happened is, given Warren's Saturday morning cartoon levels of incompetence, the actual rail was laid down first, went way over budget, and thus Warren decided to install basically no supportive infrastructure to then cut costs. And since I refuse to believe he was in the business of hiring union workers, I mean, I severely doubt that running around with cult masks and shotguns is within the union's scope of work, he could very easily give a disturbingly stiff middle finger to any safety regulations. Though this makes sense once you realize that the Charles Mining Company was bought out by Norfolk Southern. Oh shit, I just realized this entire game is a metaphor for the Union Pacific merger.
What are you fucking talking about?
So, considering everything we've covered, the extensive rail network, the lack of infrastructure, the low number of engines, the slow pace of work, and the obsessive cost cutting of Warren, does the rail network in Aranirum make sense?
Yes!
But we're not quite done yet. We still need to explain the actual method of shipping all these mining products around and off the island. And trust me, the explanation is once again really stupid and not surprising in the least. First off, remember that boxcars typically weren't used to carry mining products. That was left to hopper cars. But boxcars absolutely could be used to save on initial costs as they require less infrastructure to support. And we already established how Aranirum has about as much infrastructure as the middle of the Sahara Desert. Typically, when boxcars were used to ship mining products like coal, boards were installed at the bottom of the doorways to prevent all the coal or whatever they were shipping from spilling out. However, none of the boxcars on the island have this modification. This means the mined gold would have to be stored in separate containers on the boxcars to prevent spillage. Next, 2 of the island's docks contain rails specifically gauged for mine carts, and these rails go all the way to the end of the pier. This means that the mine carts full of product were likely moved directly onto whatever ferries or barges would travel to the island. However, this means that the mine carts would actually have to get to these rails. But why would the island set things up like this? Because the island wasn't using their boxcars to haul gold, they were using them to haul mine carts filled with gold. I need to take just a moment to go over how monumentally stupid this is. First of all, I can't find any record of mining product being hauled in this way. Typically, minecarts would haul their product to some kind of hopper placed above the railway so it could just pour into the open hopper cars. Even in the case of boxcars hauling minerals, some kind of setup was used to allow the minerals to be easily funneled into the boxcars because gravity is free to use, or at least until Nintendo patents that too. Hauling minecarts onto boxcars, meanwhile, is dumb for so many reasons. For one, minecarts are really fucking heavy.
Yeah, so instead of just carrying the weight of the ore, you're also carrying the weight of the minecarts themselves, which doesn't make sense, because then you're just carrying a whole bunch of extra weight for no reason. That's part of the reason why generally when you're transporting ores or stuff like that, you want to like limit the amount of time you're transporting the raw ore before it gets processed. Because then because it's much more lucrative to carry the refined product because you're wasting less time and energy transporting literal waste product.
This listing I found for a minecart that more or less matches the ones we see on the island weighs it at 820 pounds while empty. Now, in the mines themselves, we do have evidence that mine trains were used due to this note here. These are trains that were specifically used in mines to haul heavy minecarts. However, I don't think I need to state that you wouldn't be able to use a mine train to haul minecarts directly onto onto a boxcar. In fact,
Yeah.
looking at how the mine rails are set up, the miners are literally having to derail the minecarts, push them by hand on loose soil, up a ramp, and into the boxcar. Never mind that you'd still have to find a way to secure the minecarts while inside the boxcar, but this only gets us halfway there. We still need to haul the minecarts to the docks, which involves moving them down the boxcar ramps through the dirt and back onto the rails. What the fuck? This, however, is completely in line with the very typical work harder not smarter mantra that the Charles Mining Company is so obsessed with that it makes Aperture Science look reasonable by comparison.
Those of you who volunteered to be injected with praying mantis DNA, bad news is we're postponing those tests indefinitely. Good news is we've got a much better test for you. Fighting
an army of man
men.
mantises.
So, does
Oh, never
the
mind, that was
freight
from
and
the alternate
hauling of
universe.
Aranira make sense? Does Tim the Tank Engine turn diesel make sense? Is the game scary?
Oh yeah, it's a horror game, right?
To shift gears away from the answer that yes, the Aranira Railroad makes sense, which is probably the scariest part of the game, Choo Choo Charles does have its tense moments, though again, I wish he had actually come to kill me instead of just being a giant spider-shaped tease, but despite my raging horror fetish being left at half-mast,
Get some help.
the vibe of just riding around in the night, soft ambient noises, and the vague threat of a distorted train whistle in the distance is so weirdly satisfying. The NPCs, while not animated well, or at all really, have a ton of personality and got a lot of laughs out of me. The core loop of running around, finding scrap, and upgrading your train is incredibly satisfying, especially as you start to see actual results and the idea of killing Charles becomes more and more of a reality. And on that note, the combat is fun. Simple, sure, but the impromptu nature of the combat adds a fun level of tension that makes the actual fights feel like an amazing payoff. Really, my biggest issue with the game is the $20 price tag. But if you can catch it on sale and you like trains or have some pent-up aggression against Thomas the Tank Engine for some reason, then yeah, pick it up. It's a simple and very short game, but that's honestly kind of refreshing. And for the whole railroad review part, to my regular viewers, if you liked this kind of offbeat analysis thing and want me to do more, like analyzing, I don't know, how much does it cost to get a VIP pass for Roxy's room, please let me know, either in the comments or just by liking this video. And for the
that'd be
railroaders
fun.
watching, if you found something about my railroad analysis that you thought was inaccurate, also please let me know. Again, I'm no expert, and I would love to hear your opinions on this incredibly stupid railroad, but that's part of the fun of it, really. I have no doubt that this railroad would never exist in any modern setting except for this island. If I were analyzing the trains in, say, GTA 5, which no, I'm not going to do, I'm more of a Saints Row guy,
Pretty little thing.
I'd have held the rail network to far higher standards of infrastructure and overall quality. But on this tiny island run by the reincarnation of Cornelius Vanderbilt, that's the last train joke, I swear, I can absolutely see this jumbled mess happening, because context is important. And on the concept of context, that's actually going to be a major part of my next video, when I finally play Bendy and the Dark Revival. Now, normally when I play horror games, I try not to take the context of the previous games into account. I try to judge them on their own merits. I mean, hell, I went on an entire rant about that in my security breach review. However, you Bendy fans out there were constantly telling me that almost every problem I had with the ink machine was fixed in Dark Revival. So you know what? To hell with it. Why not take that bet? And already as I'm halfway through the game as of writing this review, I have quite a lot to say about that. So, Bendy fans, this next video isn't going to just be a review, it's going to be a chat between you, me, and this brick wall I built between us. But I hope you enjoyed this review of both the game and its railroad. And if nothing else, there are two key lessons I hope you've learned from this video. One, no amount of cost cutting and incompetent infrastructure planning will save you from being eaten by a giant spider. And two, rocket launchers are fucking fun.
On it. Oh, I am so happy I watched that. That was fun. Oh god, Cheeseyeen, you have earned a subscribe from me, good sir. I definitely want to see more from you in the future, and I definitely may check out some of your older stuff. I mean, I know there are some, like, again, narrow gauge, using narrow gauge stuff on wider gauge tracks is a thing that has been done before. If I can find a picture, there's a picture somewhere of like this little narrow gauge engine from like Wales that's been put onto this big trolley so it can actually drive around on standard gauge track, and it is so stupid. But again, like, the fact that in some like it actually makes sense, even ignoring, you know, in-world logic, it makes some level of sense. That is absolutely just terrifying. Oh god, but yeah, that was definitely beautiful. So yeah, if you want me to watch, more of Cheeseyeen's videos, let me know in the comment section below. Because that's definitely going to be it for now. So yeah, I hope you guys liked. If you did, leave a like, subscribe if you have not, and I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.